Hey, Hillary.
Hi.
Hi, how are you? Just to
Okay,
let you know, I don't want to go into details, but just to let you know, I was able to connect with Marge.
thank you very much. Today too?
I spoke with her actually the day before, so 2 days ago, so the day before the surgery.
Yeah, he's home now. He's home now.
And she then texted me, emailed me saying that he was home and that it went well.
He's home.
Yeah. But I just wanted to let you know, close the loop.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And we spoke, and Mike was on the phone too. We spoke for a good 45 minutes. It was a good conversation. Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much.
Of course. How are you doing?
I'm sorry.
How are you doing?
Well, we just had our vaccines the other day.
And
So I'm just not, it was our second. So I'm just not quite up to it yet tonight. I'll probably turn off the video screen.
that's fine. You know, that's
I don't
what I'm
want
doing. That's
to, I'm not ready for public viewing,
but
I'm vaccinated.
In one of my classes, actually, in my Beit Midrash class, Sophia Cully, I don't know if you know her, but very often they'll have their
Sophia, yeah,
Sophia. So they'll have their camera off, and somebody will say, "We don't see you," and her response is, "I'm not ready for prime time."
Well, that's me. So how are y'all doing?
We're doing okay. We're doing okay. For some people who are not able to join us, and I'm going to make sure that everyone is muted. So stay muted unless you have to say something, then you can unmute yourself and then mute yourself back up again. And today we are going to continue our exploration of the text. And we're going to look at three different sort of sections or ideas in today's lessons. We're going to look at the poem to wisdom. That's chapter 28 of Job. We're going to look at sort of God's responses, hear a little bit from Job, but Job is pretty quiet when God is speaking. And then we're going to look at the end, and we're going to look at the epilogue and sort of see how this all wraps and how this all comes back together again. Because without that epilogue, it would have been a very different book. And we're going to sort of really try to focus today on what's being said and understanding it. We're going to want to talk about what it all means as a whole. And remember, we're going to save that really for the last session. So if we start to go down that way, I may say, let's save that for the last session. Because I want to look at the text first, and then we'll have the philosophical conversation kind of all together as we go. Any questions on this? So let's begin. We're going to sort of jump right in to chapter 28. And it is a poem that has been written to wisdom, right? And we're going to have a conversation about why this is here. Remember, we've gone through the bargain sort of with Satan in the beginning, the first two chapters, and then all the conversations with the friends back and forth, trying to get him to listen and trying to get him to realize that God is right and all this sort of stuff, and Job just can't see it. And now we move into this poem that is there. So let's see, where are we? I'm going to go the other way this time. Kimberly Rickles, do you want to read? I figured I can. Can you? You may be on your phone, so I don't know if you can see it. But
she's muted.
There you go. You have to unmute.
She's still talking. Kimberly, you need to unmute.
No, she's looking for it.
Unmute.
There you go.
Am I unmuted? Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can read this because I am on my phone. But
I see that. I'm looking at it now. Yeah.
That's okay. There is a mine for silver and a place where gold is refined. Iron is taken out of the earth and copper smelted from rock. He sets bounds for darkness to every limit man probes. To rocks in deepest darkness, They open up a shaft far from where men live, in places forgotten by wayfarers, destitute of men, far removed. Earth out of which food grows is changed below as if into fire. Man sets his hand against the flinty rock and overturns mountains by the roots. He carves out channels through rock. His eyes behold every precious thing. He dams up the sources of the streams so that hidden things may be brought to light. But where can wisdom be found? Where is the source of understanding? No man can set a value on it. It cannot be found in the land of the living.
Okay, good. Thank you, Kimberly. So first, a couple of notes on this. You notice that I actually skipped some verses here, only because it was a lot of repetition with different imagery and stuff like that, and I wanted us to get to the point. So there really sort of is a division here between 1 to 5 and then 9 to 13. The other thing is, some of you, many of you probably over the course of the last 20 years, may have heard me recite some of these words. It's actually a reading that often I will read at a funeral for somebody who has been a great teacher or very, very wise. Often I will read through verses 1 and 2, right? There's a mine for silver in places where gold was fine, iron is taken from the earth, and copper is smelted from the rock. But where can wisdom be found? Where is the source of understanding? Right? Is one of the readings that I'll often do at a funeral. So we've got two different sections here. The first is this sort of esoteric big picture of, you know, all of these things we can get a hold of, but wisdom is elusive, right? Wisdom is not something that we can grab a hold of, that we can capture in the way that we do some of these other things, whether it's silver or gold or those sorts of things. We can do that. We can make that, but we can't make wisdom. Then we move to the bottom section, which is really about almost the power of humanity, right? Human beings can do all these things. We can overturn mountains and carve channel through rocks and dam up the source of streams so that hidden things may be brought to light. We can do all of that, but we still don't seem to be able to find wisdom. Comments or thoughts on why is this in the book of Job? I mean, why is this here now? At the end of the dialogues, right, the extensive dialogues that we have between Job and his friends, this is the transition into the last section. What is it doing for us? Anybody have any thoughts or ideas? Nobody? Oh, Peter, I just see you now. So there you go. I wasn't looking at you before, but now, Peter, I saw your hand go up. Go ahead, Peter.
It's, to me, I'm hearing an echo of building of the Mishkan with the metals being mentioned here, because we were just studying that last week in the Parshas when we build the temple. So I'm wondering if there's any parallels of these metals all being mentioned in the building of a Jewish soul.
It's an interesting question, Peter, and I wouldn't say no to it outright, but there's a lot more here than was in the Mishkan. The Mishkan was very, very specific, and this poem waxes on poetically.
But those were the materials that they collected from the people, really.
These were some of them, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if I'm hearing an echo of that.
It could be. I don't know if it's a direct echo, but it's a nice midrash, if nothing else. It's a nice way to connect the text together in terms of that. Diana.
I think he's like giving thought. Like I got through chapter 26. I didn't get to 27. So I'm trying to place it in context, but I think maybe he's giving thought to what these three fellows were saying to him when he was just like, oh my God, like, excuse my language, like my life sucks. Like, why couldn't I have just died at birth? And why did I have to, why were the knees there to bear me? And all, he's going through this whole, like, I mean, just terrible woe is me thing. And I think,
Right.
I think maybe he's like, well, I still got my wisdom, like that. I don't know. Maybe he's starting to have a little bit of a shift here after, like,
Well, so here's the question.
after venting and then
Yeah, here's
processing.
the question.
I don't know.
I am not sure who the voice is of this chapter. Is it Job?
Oh.
I don't think so. I actually think this is the narrator's voice.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Right?
Yeah, because 27 says Job took up this theme and said,
Correct.
And then we go to
and then
28.
27 ends, and then 28 is really a change of tone and everything. And so I actually have always read this, and I could be wrong, but I've always read this as the narrator's voice.
Oh,
as
I like that.
Sort of remember, before we go on with all of this, before we start to hear God's answer, right? That wisdom and understanding is elusive. And it's hard. And it doesn't come easily. And it's not always there for us. And all of these sorts of things, it's almost like a reader's warning, before we get to the rest of this, before we hear God's response of saying, you may not get it all, and you may not understand it all as we go. Marge or Mike, I don't know which one of you. Michelson, I don't know which one of you. But you need to unmute.
If it's saying it cannot be found in the land of the living, then is it implying that it has to be with God, that we never can find it? Really?
Yes, I mean, yes. I mean, ultimately, true wisdom and true understanding, we finite human beings are not going to be able to understand it, because true wisdom and true understanding of the infinite can only come from the infinite. And that's only when our souls are released from their shackles, so to speak, right? And from the confines of this physical body that we have. That's how I read it, is that, true wisdom, we're not going to know until we're dead. That doesn't mean we can't try and strive for it, but know that we're not going to have all the answers. So I agree with you.
Because the things that it's listing that are created take a certain amount of wisdom, a certain type of wisdom to create them.
Right. Well, it takes ingenuity. It takes creativity. It doesn't necessarily take wisdom.
Well,
right?
It's kind of well, to me, it's like a concrete wisdom. You have to know things, right?
Yeah. So it's a great question, right? What's the difference between knowledge and wisdom, or intelligence and wisdom, right? Knowledge is the ability to, make a weapon. Wisdom is the decision not to, because you don't want to hurt people, right? Or, so it's those two are mixed together. Tom.
Okay, great. I was just thinking how up to this point, Job has always sort of defined and identified himself by his accomplishments. And this is sort of requiring a radical shift in thinking, because the accomplishments are kind of easy, and those aren't as meaningful as the things that are more elusive, which are more difficult. And that's sort of, I guess that's sort of my thought.
I like that, Tom. Yes, I think you're right. It's all been about accomplishments. It's all been about physical things, right? Woe is me. I've lost all these material possessions. And that's where Satan begins all of this, right? Job is only great because he has all these things. But what's true, the true gift, the true thing that we have is wisdom, not the things.
Yeah, I agree.
So let's look and see how the rabbis play with this a little bit. And what I've done is I've taken, this verse but where can wisdom be found? Where is the source of understanding? And I want to highlight the words here. V'hachochma me'ayin timatzeh. And the key word that we're going to be looking at, among others, is me'ayin. Me'ayin. Okay? And first of all, the Malbim, one of the commentators, adds in this idea of wisdom, which is the most precious, it should be thing, sorry about that, in the world, is not revealed to us. This dichotomy of saying we have all these things, all these gifts that are precious, silver, gold, and this is how he's reading it, right? The Malbim sees all these things as precious things that we have control over. But the most precious thing is wisdom, and it's not revealed to us. Lo noda lanu. It's not known to us, right? It's in the passive. But as we turn to Kedushat Halevi, he brings a very interesting viewpoint on this. He reads as follows. Kedushat Halevi is a Hasidic text. He says, as the author has mentioned several times, Chokhmah, true wisdom, is the result of divesting oneself totally of one's ego. We're going to see how he says this, right? Why he's bringing this. As we know from another verse in Job, because he's talking about Bishalach Exodus here, V'chokhmah me'ayin timatzeh, our verse, and wisdom you will find through negating. Why is it translated that way? Because the word ayin is the word ein, nothing, in Hebrew. So he's playing with this word, and he says, you will only find true wisdom when you negate, when you get rid of all of the baggage that we have, our ego, all of that stuff that drives us. And to some degree, this is the story of Job, right? So he's responding directly to Job here, right? Job was filled with all of these great things, and he sort of felt like he deserved it. And when it was all taken away from him, he felt that anger and that bitterness because he deserved it. But that's all about ego. And if Job were able to get rid of that, according to Kedushat Levi here, if Job were able to get rid of that, he would have truly understood the wisdom of God a lot earlier. It would have been a much easier process than having to go through everything. So this is the way that we start to see the rabbis playing with the book of Job, and you can see they're already starting to derive their homiletic, their sermons, so to speak, and their values from it. Any questions on these two rabbinic viewpoints? Malbim was early Middle Ages. Kedushat Levi is more modern. Okay.
I just had one quick comment. I think
Go
it's
ahead.
really, I love how they take these things that are like so valuable. And I was thinking about the beginning of Eshet Chayil and where can this woman of valor, and her price is like above rubies. And there's just all this other values that are just so much more important throughout, not just in the book of Eov, but we see that in other parts of Tanakh, which I think is kind of,
yeah, for sure. Nancy,
cool.
Go ahead.
Okay, so there's a lot of collateral damage going on here too, in addition to everything that's happening to Job. If it was just happening to Job, then it could be an issue of ego, as they say, and getting rid of his ego. But children were killed, and a lot of other people were harmed in the process. So that isn't all about Job. That's also about other people, though they're pretty much ignored after the first couple of verses. So
Correct. It is true. Look, I mean, I guess to some degree, it doesn't take away your question, but to some degree, we have to try and decide, right? Is this a true story, meaning an historical story, right? Because it can be true and non-historical. Those are two different, right? But is it a true story? Is it a historical story? Is it a story that's been crafted to share truths? Now, that doesn't take away your question, because yes, there still is a lot of collateral damage, but if it's something that's been, we have fairy tales and we have stories that are told and on the movies, to get a point across, and we see a lot of damage, but it's not real damage. It's there to help tell the story.
Right.
I don't know. It's a good question. It's a good
Rabbi?
question. Yes, Elisheva.
Yeah, just a little note on the Hebrew.
Yes.
It's correct. The word ayin or ain means there is no, but actually the word me'ayin, and it is used in Hebrew, instead of saying, where are you from, me'efo, we don't say me'efo, from where, but we say me'ayin. So it also stands for from where or where.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. So the pshat, the simple meaning of the text of the Hebrew is, from where will wisdom, where can wisdom be found? That's why it's translated this way. But Kedushat Halevi, who's coming from a mystical tradition, right, is able to look at those words and say, wait a second, it has multiple meanings, right?
Yeah.
Me'ain, chokhmah. I mean, he's basically saying it should be vocalized differently. It should say, the chokhmah me'ain timatzeh. Right?
Hey.
That's not the pshat. That's not the simple meaning of the text. I agree with you, but it's the midrash. It's his interpretation.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Let's continue now. We're going to go back to our text. We're going to look a little bit more at the poetry of this before we go on. And you guys all moved around. All right. So I'm trying to say who didn't. Daveen, I don't think you read last time. Do you want to read? Go ahead.
Job 28, 14 through 17 and 22 through 28. The deep says, it is not in me. The sea says, I do not have it. It cannot be bartered for gold. Silver cannot be paid out as its price. The finest gold of Ophir cannot be weighed against it, nor precious onyx nor sapphire. Gold or glass cannot match its value, nor vessels of fine gold be exchanged for it. God understands the way to it. He knows its source. For he sees to the ends of the earth, observes all that is beneath the heavens. When he fixed the weight of the winds, set the measure of the waters, when he made a rule for the rain and a course for the thunderstorms, then he saw it and gauged it. He measured it and probed it. He said to man, see, fear the Lord is wisdom. To shun evil is understanding.
Okay. So this is still part of the poem. This is still chapter 28, right? And we're seeing a progression here. We're seeing, right, in the first part of this, human beings are not capable of finding wisdom on their own. They can't make it the way that they make gold and silver and those sorts of things. Then the next level is at the top of this page, which is, well, maybe they can go out and they can just find it naturally, right? And the answer to this is no. The ocean says, the deep says, no, it's not here. Sea says, I don't have it. Can't buy it. You can't go out. You can't, right? You can't make it. You can't buy it. You can't find it. And then we finally get to the climax of this poem. And the point of all of this, the only way to wisdom is through God. The only way to wisdom, God is the only one that knows its source. God is the only one that can see the earth extended from one side to the next, right? And ultimately, the fear, right? Fear of God is wisdom. And again, this word fear, you've heard me translate it in other settings. It's not fear like I'm afraid of the dark. It's awe. Awe of God. Yirat Adonai. fear of God or awe of God is wisdom. So the message here to Job is, you were looking in all the wrong places. You were complaining. You would put your faith in all of these things that and said, God is so great. But in all reality, you were trying to find wisdom in all of these things through in the wrong places. It's ultimately only in God. And this now sets up the next chapter, which is the beginning of God speaking to Job. Does everybody sort of see literarily how we're flowing from one to the next? Actually, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. The next part of it is actually the monologues, right? There are a couple of monologues before we get to God's speeches. There are a couple of monologues from chapter 29 into the 30s. Our Job speaks, and then some other people speak, and it brings us back, which is why we're going to get frustration. It brings us back into some of the patterns that we saw earlier. So the poem was there, it was a warning, and it went back into these old patterns. Peter.
Why do I hear the sound of a parent talking to a child here? And the child.
We hear that a lot with God, right? We hear that a lot with God.
And, we landed on Mars and we really got our first look back from another planet. And, we are, maybe it's just us learning, from God all along. And we're looking back at another world now from another world. 300 million miles is a long distance to have a look for humanity, No, and I hear the echo of God taking a parental role in us in this, and it's
well, we're going to hear a voice. We're going to hear the voice of a very angry parent soon. So
I'll wait. I don't read ahead.
We're going to hear the voice of an angry parent soon. All right, Michael. Before we go on, go ahead. But Michael Frank. Sorry, we've got 3 Michaels here today.
Yes, thank you. I'm a little confused about this, because right at the beginning, if we remember the beginning of this, Job was a pretty upstanding citizen. Sure, he had a lot of wealth, but he also did all the things that made God proud of him, and pointed to the Hasatan to say, hey, look at this terrific guy. So, what I see is Job did fear God. And so I'm just wondering.
So
I'm still
that's the question. Michael, it's a great question. That's the question that, I think we're going to start to try to answer, or try to struggle with in the last session, in that, so who was Job, right? And if Job wasn't what God thought Job was, what does that mean? Because ultimately, Job wasn't what God thought Job was, because Satan was right. And when all these things were taken away, it all crumbled.
Well, we'll see. There are phrases at the end, and
yes,
you'll get to them now, which casts some uncertainty in what you just said.
Yes, we're trying to figure it out. We're trying to figure it out. Yeah. But it's raising these questions. Look, we can go back and look at our history of our relationship with God and our human beings' relationship with God, and say, if God is all-knowing and all-powerful, why did God allow certain things to happen, right? What does it mean that God got so upset with humanity during the time of Noah that God wiped everybody out? Didn't God know that was going to happen? Right? What does it mean that God gets so frustrated with the children of Israel, right? Throughout the desert, the God threatens to wipe us out almost every other day, right? And it isn't until Moses steps in and says, wait, what are people going to think? And all these kind of stuff that the God relents. So it's very interesting, right? The theology of our relationship with God and free will versus what God predicts is really interesting.
Yes. And I'm not one to believe that God set us loose with free will, and even against his angels' advice. And so I think that God doesn't know what each individual decision is going to be. And I just don't think that's right.
So I'll challenge you the other way. So, when I teach in my philosophy, theology classes and stuff like that, we teach about free will, free will and predetermination.
Oh, okay.
Right. So if things are predetermined through predestined, then how do we have free will? Or if God knows what we're going to do, because God is omniscient, then do we really have free will? That's the big question, right? If God is all knowing, well, then God knows what I'm going to do, and I don't have free will because God already knows. So that's where I actually push back on the argument. And here's what I say is, the better that we know somebody, the more likely we are to be able to predict what their response is going to be. For example, if I leave my dishes in the sink and I don't do them, after more than 2 decades of marriage, I have a pretty high likelihood of being able to predict what my wife's response is going to be. Right? Now, she could surprise me and not, and go in a different direction. It's possible, but because I know her, right? I can predict what her behavior is going to be. And the more I know somebody, the better I can predict. So if we're going to argue that God knows us infinitely well, then the accuracy of God's prediction is infinite. That doesn't mean that I have any control over what Debbie's reaction is, because she still has the free will to respond how she's going to respond. Even though I know what it's going to be, it doesn't say that she doesn't have free will. But that's a conversation for a different time. Let's get back to our text here. Okay, so let's move on into God's speeches, because Nancy, do you have a quick comment before we go off into that?
I don't know if it's quick.
All right, well then I want to go back to this, and if we have time at the end.
But it's about this.
Okay, go ahead, and I'll see if we have time to answer. Go ahead.
Okay. When I read that section, what it calls to mind to me is sort of more of a universal knowingness, or other religions that have more of an amorphous vision of what God or wisdom or the universe is, as opposed to in the earlier books of the Torah, God is pretty well personified. I mean, he acts like a human being, as opposed to being the essence of knowingness, or some more vague phrase like that. And in a religion like Buddhism, there isn't. You're seeking infinite wisdom.
Yeah. So let me respond to you quickly, and then you and I can talk about this more offline if you want to. But my response to you is to say that Judaism has both streams within it in terms of how it perceives and how it conceives of God. There's no doubt that God is very anthropomorphized within Judaism. We see it in our texts all over the place. We see it in the way that we understand. We talk about attributes of God as very human attributes of justice and those sorts of things. Because that's the way that we can understand it. At the same time, we see God as the Ein Sof, God as the infinite, and therefore containing every possibility all at the same time. And both of those are very present within our tradition. So you kind of see a bounce back and forth, and you'll see a leaning one way or another, depending on what text we're reading. But we do see both within our tradition.
But then, I mean, and relating it to Job, in his previous incarnation, he was very personified. He
Yep.
was like God in that way that he was a good man and he did good things and he earned what he got. And now it seems like, okay, what he's looking for now, you're not going to find it under a rock or in the sea or whatever. It's really trying to dissociate yourself from the finite in order to be able to understand the infinite.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's got both within this. And, we see God sitting down in the beginning. I imagine this at a bar, right, with Satan making this deal, and now we're talking about. And wait until we get it again. Now we're going to hear more from God. The distance between humanity and God is going to increase greatly as we read these next sections. But I do want to go because we're going to run out of time.
Okay,
we've got a lot of text to get through. So let's see, where are we? Tom, do you want to continue?
Sure. Okay, Job chapter 38, verses 1 through 13. Then the Lord replied to Job out of the tempest and said, "Who is this who darkens counsel, speaking without knowledge? Gird your loins like a man. I will ask, and you will inform me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundations? Speak if you have understanding. Do you know who fixed its dimensions or who measured it with a line? Onto what were its bases sunk? Who set its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the divine beings shouted for joy? Who closed the sea behind doors when it gushed forth out of the womb, when I clothed it in clouds, swaddled it in dense clouds? When I made breakers my limit for it and set up its bars and doors and said, you may come so far and no farther, here your surging waves will stop. Have you ever commanded the day to break, assigned the dawn its place, so that it seizes the corners of the earth and shakes the wicked out of it?"
Okay. So first of all, this is a very, very famous section of text. It's probably one of the most famous within Job. And I'm actually just turning to another part of our Tanakh here just for a second. And hold on a second.
You finally got the Da Vinci Code in.
Yeah, I told you I got the Da Vinci Code in there. Yeah, I would. I'm looking, well, I don't want to take it, but it's interesting to compare this piece of it with the end of the book of Jonah, right? In terms of God's response as we go through. But it'll take us too far afield. But this is God's response of, who are you, right? This is not we're the same. Where we can be close, we can be intimate, right? In terms of knowing one another and all of that. This is, you are judging me and you have no standing by which to judge me, because you are this finite creature and I am God. And God speaks out of the tempest, right? This is out of a storm. This isn't just a nice, we've had lots of experiences where we see God engaging with a human being. This is not the one that I would choose if I had to, of the way that I would want to see God, right? This is scary. This goes back to fear and awe is what's going to bring wisdom, right? That's what we heard at the end of the poem. Fear and awe is what's going to bring wisdom. And God then is coming forward then in this role of, who are you? For those who do want to know the Da Vinci Code, you may come so far and no further, is the verse that comes from the movie Da Vinci Code. It's actually in the part of the movie where they had sent them down on a false trail and they had found a box that they thought was going to lead them to the Holy Grail. And the answer was, you come so far and no further. And that was the way that they found out that they were actually on a false trail. So we see God now taking a very hard position, which we struggle with, because at the beginning of the story, this is all because God let it happen. Well, let's see what goes on. I want to look at a couple of rabbinic pieces to this. Then the Lord appeared to Job out of a Se'ara. It's interesting. Some of the rabbis play with Se'ara and try to make, because it sounds like hair, Se'or, spelled a little bit differently, but there's two responses that the Malbim gives to these verses. First is on what's going on here. With this, God directly answers all the questions Job had asked concerning the suffering of the righteous. For it makes him realize that the man's essence is his soul, not the body, not all these things that we want and crave and stuff like that, but the soul, which is distinct from the body and cleaves to God. To gaze upon the pleasure of the Lord and to hear God's voice from the fire. And this is the essential reward that awaits the righteous after the wasting of the body, when the spirit returns to the Lord who gave it. So we almost hear a little bit of Hinduism, Buddhism in here. Like, this life is illusion, and it's hard and it's suffering, and it really is the next life that you're going to fully understand, because the body is going to waste away and everything we have, and there's going to be suffering here in this life. That's one response the Malbim has. The second is this this verse, gird your lands up like a man. That's really what it says, right? Izar na kegever, like, what does it mean? Or how does the Malbim understand this particular verse? During the debate, Job had asked for a hearing with God. Now, this is now being granted to him. However, he'd also asked that if it were granted, first let God remove his rod from my back, and let his awe not terrify me, so they might confront one another on terms as equal as possible. The second request is now also granted before God proceeds any further with his questioning, and he restores Job to full health. Now, how does he get that? It's this idea of getting dressed. And the rabbis pick up on that in other places. The Malbim is citing this. The rabbis pick up on that getting dressed, when you're ill, when you're suffering, you're laying in bed, you don't have your clothes on, but God is basically saying, okay, get up, come, let's have a conversation, right? Get dressed. And for the Malbim, this means that Job is starting to get some of his strength back. That God is starting to, at the same time as yelling at him, is starting to equalize the playing field. So we get these two very different ideas happening within this speech. So we see a little bit later, I'll just read this really, really quickly because I want to go through it. It's a similar theme, but I wanted you to hear the difference of the words. The first part is the same. The Lord replied to Job out of the tempest, gird your loins like a man, and I will ask and you will inform me. Would you impugn my justice? So the first retort was, who are you? I created the world. That was a power position, right? I'm the creator, you're the created. But this is now a moral question, right? You're saying to me, what you're doing, God, is wrong. Would you impugn my justice? Would you condemn me that you may be right? Have you an arm like God's? Can you thunder? And it goes back to this thing of you don't have the ability to do that. Whether it's power or morality, God is supreme. This is the response that we hear back from God out of the tempest. So now we get to the final section. This is the epilogue. This is the last chapter. And we're going to see three things sort of happen in the course of all of this in a very quick order to bring the story to a close. Okay? Let's see, where are we? Michael Frank, I'm going up. You're above Tom on my screen. Would you like to read?
Sure. Job said in reply to the Lord, I know that you can do everything, that nothing you propose is impossible for you. Who is this who obscures counsel without knowledge? Indeed, I spoke without understanding of things beyond me, which I did not know. Hear now, and I will speak. I will ask, and you will inform me. I had heard you with my ears, but now I see you with my eyes. Therefore, I recant and relent, being but dust and ashes.
Okay. So the first step in the epilogue is Job gives in. Job says, I recant and I relent. I am dust and ashes. You are God. I get it now, right? I get it now. And what's interesting is the very phrase that God used as as almost a point of anger, right? You know, you will ask and I will answer, right? It's switched around now to be something, okay, I'm going to listen. I'm going to listen. I'll ask questions. You're going to tell me, and I'm going to listen. And it flips everything with that verse. Diana.
I think this is so beautiful how it goes from this like hubris to humility. And it reminded me of your sermons series, I guess. Was it from Rosh Hashanah? Like, was it last year when you did that? Because if you read like in the intermediate, in the chapters we didn't cover, I mean, Job is like, hey, I was all that. Like, you know, people would bow to, like, he was like Joseph with people bowing to him. And I had all this money and I was the richest man. And, you know, I was so great. And why did this happen? And so we really just see this beautiful, beautiful shift from this hubris to humility. That's like, where he's still functioning. Like he's been squashed, and his friends really call him in on all of this stuff too along the way.
Right.
And it's just beautiful. Like I definitely encourage folks to read what we didn't get to here, because it's
for sure.
Phenomenal text.
42 chapters.
Yeah.
And verse 5 is really important to me because, you know, this verse 5 connects us back to our conversation on wisdom. Right? For me, verse 5, I heard you with my ears. Like it was coming in, but I really didn't get it. But now I see. Right? There's another sense that has now been opened up, that I now have some wisdom that I didn't have before because of all of this that happened to me. Peter, quick question, because we're running out of time.
I just see that Job finally realizing that the true wealth is not in the physical world, it's in the spiritual world.
Yes.
And that just rings so clear in these verses, that the wisdom is what he should have been seeking all along, not the material wealth of the world.
Yes. And this to me sort of goes back to, and I can't remember, I think it was Michael Frank who was talking, I can't remember now who was talking about collateral damage.
No,
Who was
no,
that?
me.
That was, it was Nancy? Yeah, okay. It was Nancy. You know, this doesn't make it any better from a modern perspective, but from their perspective, right? Job saw his family as property, as things, right? He didn't connect to them as people. And that is part of what this all is. This was all property. This is all to show what he had, right? I've got, you know, I mean, it's really the equivalent. I mean, you know, we're all Jews, so we say, you know, my child's a doctor, my child's an astrophysicist, my child's all this. You know, actually, no, my child's a good person, and my child is somebody that I love, right? The rest of it is thinking about your children as property is to say, well, I'm proud because I have a child who's a doctor. And Job, the way I read this is, in the beginning, Job was seeing all of these things, including his family, as property. And
window dressing.
Yes. And at the end, he's starting to realize that that's not the way that it is. Okay. So the first part of the epilogue is Job's saying, I give up. You're right. I'm wrong, and I'm sorry. The second piece now, if I can get to it, there we go, is God going to take care of some business, right? God's going to take care of some business. Diana, you want to read? You're above Tom.
Sure. After the Lord had spoken these words to Job, the Lord said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I am incensed at you and your two friends, for you have not spoken the truth about me, as did my servants of Job. Now take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to my servant Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for yourselves. And let Job, my servant, pray for you. For to him I will show favor and not treat you vilely, since you have not spoken the truth about me, as did my servant Job. Eliphaz the Temanite and Bildad the Shuhite and Zophar the Naamathite went and did as the Lord had told them. And the Lord showed favor to Job. And the Lord restored Job's fortunes when he prayed on behalf of his friends. And the Lord gave Job twice what he had before. All his brothers and sisters and all his former friends came to him and had a meal with him in his house. They consoled and comforted him for all the misfortune that the Lord had brought upon him. Each gave him 1 casita and each 1 gold ring.
Okay. So the first part of this is God coming to the friends and saying, you guys missed the point of all this. You did not do what you needed to be doing. And perhaps that's why we were in this cycle of chapter upon chapter of dialogues where Job couldn't see past where he was. And it wasn't until God intervened directly that Job was able to see past it, because his friends weren't doing it. So that's the first piece of this. But then at the end of all of this, right, God restores Job's fortunes. And we see this as the last part of it. Let's see, where are we? Elisheva, do you want to read?
Thus the Lord blessed the latter years of Job's life more than the former. He had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. The first he named Jemima,
Mm-hmm.
the second Keziah, and the third Keren Hapuch. Nowhere in the land were women as beautiful as Job's daughters to be found. Their father gave them estates together with their brothers. And afterward, Job lived 140 years to see 4 generations of sons and grandsons. So Job died old and contented.
Okay. So we see that where we began and where we ended is at least the same place. This is saying it's even better than it was, right? But it's at least the same place. And so what we're going to see through this and what we'll discuss in 2 weeks is the shape of this U, right? Of being here, having troubles, having things get difficult, and then finding a way back. And it's why actually Job is seen as a hopeful book and not a book that is just woe is me and, like Lamentations or those sorts of things, a book of tragedy. This is not a tragedy. This is, a book that had or a story that has, a character. There were challenges the character had to face, and the character then overcame them in the end. That's ultimately the arc of the story that we have here. So when we talk about it, we need to we'll think about it in that way as we go. There were a bunch of chats I know that I actually missed as we kind of go through this. Let me just see. Job seems to be getting physically closer to God than Moshe, who said, "Do not come any closer." That's interesting, Saul. Right? The intimacy between, even with the anger that's there out of the tempest, the intimacy, at least in these moments, between that. The only challenge I would have with that is, like, we know that the relationship between God and Moses was seen as Moses was seen as God's trusted servant and stuff like that. But this text seemed, I hear what you're saying with that. Timely with the pandemic, vis-a-vis how much people have lost as a result of this. And yes, Saul, you're right. The pandemic impacted the vulnerable, the poor. This is somewhat of a Hollywood ending, and it's a story of redemption. So we're starting to try and make sense out of all of this as we go. Marge, I'm going to let you ask your question and make your comment, and then we'll talk about how we're going to deal with the last 2 weeks of this class. You need to unmute though. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a problem with what happened to the loss of his children, all the loss of the people that I think Nancy mentioned.
Right.
Like, that has no meaning. It's just like, okay, so you lost them and now you have all this new family.
Yep. Yes. I mean,
How is that
there is no doubt that with a modern look at this and a modern sensibility, this is very troubling. It's not so uncommon in more ancient texts, right? And the story is being told that Job didn't understand the value of what he had. He just said, I'm great because I have all of this. And that included not only his property, but included his family. And so he lost that. And then once he began to realize the value, the story goes, it's now coming back. Now, it's not the same people, obviously, right? But it's coming back. Alicia.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
why are we coming back to the material things?
What do you mean?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he was
I see
not.
what you're saying. Because now, I mean, the idea is now Job has the wisdom to understand the value, the true value in what he has. That's why it says, it doesn't just say that Job died old. This word contented is, I think, very important for this story. Contented in the fact that he understood, right? He now understood. It wasn't, we know people that are very, very rich and very, very unhappy because they don't understand the value of what's true there. In this story, Job was one of those people. And now he's both rich and happy because he understands its value. So Diana asks a very, very good question. And we'll talk a little bit about it next week. What happened to Satan? What happened to the adversary? Right? Like, if this really were a Hollywood movie, as I can't remember whether Saul who said that or who said that, if this really were a Hollywood movie, then we would have a scene back at the bar between God and Satan, right? For true closure in all of this. And to me, by the way, I'll cut to the chase a little bit for what we're going to talk about next week. Because Satan does not work independently of God, Satan's job was done. To have Satan come back and have that conversation would actually be giving Satan more power than Satan has, right? You don't see the prosecuting attorney when the trial is over. They move on to somebody else, right? All you see are the people afterwards. Saul say leaving it for Job 2, the sequel. Only if Mel Brooks does it. That I would watch as we go. All right, so the next 2 weeks, what are we going to do for the next 2 weeks? We've gone through the text, and I said to you at the beginning, I mean, I really thought about doing this a 10-week class, to be honest with you. And I just felt like it's hard for people to commit to 10 weeks. And I wanted people to get their taste and be able to do that. But there's so much material. So I really encourage you to continue to look, continue to read. I just tried to give you a taste at some of the highlights of this. But as Frank mentioned before, there's a lot more in there and a lot of back and forth through this. It's not quite so linear and clear as I made it. I did that for the sake of this course, so we can kind of see our way through it. But there's a lot of great, great material and that I encourage you to read. Next week, we're going to speak about Hasatan. We're going to speak about the adversary. We're going to go back and look at the role that Satan plays here. And then I'm going to take it actually a little bit further and say, what is the role that Satan plays within Judaism? And a lot of that comes from here, right? A lot of that comes from here. But we talk a lot, we have a lot of Christian colleagues and friends who see Satan and the devil and all of that as very differently than we as Jews do. And sometimes they'll come to us and they'll say, well, the book of Job is in your text. Why don't you understand what Satan is doing in the world? And so what I want to do is to help you understand from a Jewish perspective what Satan's role is so that we can have those conversations with our Christian neighbors and say, look, we get it. Yes, you're right. Satan is in the book of Job, but we understand it very differently. We understand Satan's role very, very differently. And then the last week, which is 2 weeks from now, we are going to try and bring all of this together and make some sense of it. We're going to see some more rabbinic sources on how they sort of think about Job and see Job as a whole, and try to make some sense about what Job can teach us as Jews in the 21st century. All right, my friends, any questions? I'm going to stop the share here. Any questions that you guys have for me before we go? All right. Elisheva, you have to learn how to put up your digital hand because I don't always see it when you raise your hand like this.
I don't have this in your
thing. Okay.
I have the chat, share screen, record. Oh, maybe in the reactions.
It's in reactions. That's where it is.
Now I found
it's reactions.
Okay.
No worries.
Right.
And then you can give him an applause like that too.
That's true.
All right, I'm doing
All
it.
right, Elisheva, what was your question? There you go. Now you've got it.
So I had the impression all my life, my long life, that Job is an example of patience. I never knew that there was all this discussion and suffering because he had to learn something, but rather than Job is an example of patience, and at the very end he never left God. So why was so misinformed?
Well, I mean, there are certainly times within this book as we read it where Job shows a lot of patience in spite of all of that, right? In spite of all the bad things that are happening, there are certainly times. That being said, Job eventually breaks, right? Job does break. And that's the piece that we don't talk about often. But Job breaks. And it's in the breaking and the coming back, and I'm sort of giving away a little bit of what we're going to talk about, right? It's the breaking and coming back that creates that new human being that's better than it was before. And to me, that's one of the main values of the book of Job. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? No.
Is that why about tshuva is always considered to be at a higher level than anyone else?
Well, first of all, by the way, a Baal Tshuva is very often considered to be higher than anybody else by the Baalei Tshuva. So that's one issue, right?
It's a little, yeah.
A Baal Tshuva is somebody who returns to Judaism. But that being said, yes, a Baal Tshuva, somebody who returns to Judaism, right? They left, and the fact that they came back, right? Somebody who returns through tshuva, right? Who does tshuva on Yom Kippur, right? That is seen as a higher level than somebody who didn't sin at all. Because it's harder, it's more ground to make up, so to speak, when you're sinning to come back than if you didn't do anything, great, you didn't do anything at all. Awesome, that's fine. But the people who left and came back, that's pretty impressive. Saul asked the question, is Satan ever mentioned in any other book in the Tanakh? We will deal with that next week as we do a deeper examination of Hasatan and hopefully answer that question. All right, everyone, have a great week. Stay healthy, stay safe. And when it comes to COVID, wait your turn and then take your shot.
Absolutely.
I had it.
I had it too.
And Chag Purim Sameach, everyone. Have a great Purim.
Have a
For those
great
who want to
Purim.
hear the Megillah reading, it's going to be 8 o'clock on Thursday. You can sign in via live stream.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Rabbi. Have a
Thank
good
you,
night.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
Good night,
Yeah,
everybody.
see you on
Good night,
Thursday.
everybody.
Bye.